Again, forgot to turn the bloody mic on. Hello everybody, in this episode we'll be talking problems with workbenches that I've worked on in the past and the design of the new one. So let's go. So I've had a look at the audience retention charts for the last video, and surprisingly a lot of you stuck around for 7 minutes of me rambling, so that's really good news. Thank you for that. It's good that I've been able to communicate the whole meaning of why I'm doing this series. So yeah, that's great news. I don't want to make this episode as boring and repetitive as that, so I want to be talking the problems with other workbenches that I've worked on in the past and the design of this new one that I'm doing now. So instead of me sat here talking about it, let's go to one of them. Okay, so we're at my mum's house now, and this is my home workbench. So let's take a closer look at it. So sort of around the same time I started at Rycotewood, I bought this online from a company called SIP, that's S-I-P, for roughly £100, I think. It's made of oak, sort of laminated together, kind of like those kitchen worktops you get where it's lots of little crappy bits all stuck together. And yeah, it was very wobbly to start with, and the vices on it were skewing, they were racking, they couldn't clamp a marshmallow, put it that way. So what I have done is these, hello, this is Cat Dealey. Oh. Say hello to Cat Dealey. I've done my own upgrades for it because of how crap it was to start with. What are you doing, Cat? No, Dealey. Works for me. So yeah, I did my own upgrades for it to try and bring it up to the Roubo style. So for example, when it was really wobbly, I thought, right, I need something that's actually going to brace it to start with. So I put this massive face frame on it here, which is made of poplar. This stretcher is actually dovetailed into the legs, and I'll show you a close-up of that now. Now, not only did that make the workbench rigid and stop it from skewing, but it also gave me an opportunity to bring the legs flush with the front of the workbench top. So that way it's kind of got the same Roubo style where you can clamp anything to this face frame. So these adjustments have made it somewhat usable, but it's still got a few limitations about it. First of all, it's way too low for me. It really hurts my back if I'm arched over it. So, for example, this is why I purchased the Moxon vise. Now, Dealey, you're gonna have to move. So this is the Moxon vise. I use this to solve a lot of my clamping problems on this workbench, and it is an absolutely brilliant vise. It's from Benchcrafted, and you buy it as just these massive threaded nuts and bars and stuff, and then you make your own jaws for it, but it works really well for dovetailing. So I'll show you how that attaches. So now it's come to the workbench, I'll show you some of the problems with this setup. First one being, these clamps are actually clamped onto the skirt of the workbench. So this whole workbench isn't that thick, it's actually that thick. It's got this front skirt on it that makes it appear thicker, but it's actually only about that wide. So these F clamps are only clamping on about 20 mil of material. So that makes it a little bit wobbly. The clamps aren't particularly good at holding stuff like this anyway, but it doesn't really give it a lot of surface area to grip onto. Secondly, because I built the Moxon vise the same width as this opening, it doesn't give me a lot of room to fit these clamps between the legs. So it can be a little bit of a nightmare to get that to get that centered on there in order for me to fit the clamps in as well. And while the Moxon vise is great for dovetailing, so I can just open this up with these two hand wheels, pop the board in there, set the thickness, and then that is the clamp. That's in there rock solid. It's got a suede jaw to help it. The limitation, if you're using a Moxon vise solely for edge jointing, is that first of all, these don't open massively wide. You can adjust those bars a little bit, but because it's a fixed height on it, once I pop that in there, I am planing right up by my stomach, which is really high, and that's going to put a lot of the stress on the shoulders and make planing a little bit more of a job than what it should be. So the problem with edge jointing is exactly why I bought the legs flush with the top of the workbench. What it means, you can get two bench dogs, pop them in the holes that you've drilled in the legs, and then rest your board on them, and then get a clamp and clamp that to the leg like that. And this is a really good way of turning a crap workbench into something that is pretty functional at edge jointing. Makes it far easier. So while the upgrades I've done to this bench have made it somewhat usable, I am very quickly going to outgrow this. The reason is that I'm obviously leaving Rycotewood at the end of this year, and I'm going to start having to bring power tools home and I need a bigger surface area to work on. Now this is great for hobbyists, good for occasional use, but for full-scale furniture, it's going to be very limited, so size is definitely going to need to be upgraded. So, with that in mind, let's look at the Rycotewood workbenches and we'll see what improvements we could do with those. So we're now in the wood mill at Rycotewood Furniture Centre in Oxford, and this is where I'll be spending a good 80% of this project, to be honest, because the sections are so big. So this is the workbench that you'll be familiar with seeing me work on in the other room. It's pretty much exactly the same. So let's take a closer look at this and see what improvements we can do to that. So the first advantages this workbench has over the one at home is that it is rock solid. Obviously I had to do upgrades to the one at home in order to make it stop being wobbly to start with and stop it skeeting across the floor. So this one has much thicker sections on it. The legs are a little bit thicker. It's actually got some through tenons on here, some of which are wedged, which is quite cool. But it's just built a lot more robustly than the one at home. So yeah, that's one good thing about this one here. Okay, so the main limitation of these workbenches is the work holding capacities. Now, quick release vise, very easy to install, very easy to use. However, it does have limitations about it. For example, if I was to dovetail that, it's quite a nice bit of oak actually. You can pop that in there and that's fine. Clamp it up and you've got something nice and solid and you can cut into the end of that, it's fine. However, with the Krenov cabinet that I just built, when you start working on wider panels, put that in there, but it's hitting the bars at the bottom of the quick release vise. So I can tighten that up, but it's held in quite solidly to stop it rocking. However, front to back, you've got all this wobble in it, which can affect it if you're trying to biscuit it, for example, which is what I was doing in that cabinet. Obviously, you can flip this to the other side, pop it in there, and then you can do this side as well. But, you know, that's a bit of a faff in itself, and it's quite easily avoidable if you design a good vise into a workbench. But if this case side was to expand right out over here, then you do have a bit of an issue there because you have no way of clamping this to the workbench behind it. So this is the exact reason why I bought the legs flush with the front of the desk on the workbench at home, because it allows me to clamp that against the side of the desk and stop that rattling. So these workbenches also have the limitation of not being able to hold stuff flat properly. So, for example, if I was trying to sand this board or plane it flat or something like that, I could put a dog block in here. However, I find these incredibly annoying just because it tends to like scoot around it like that if I'm planing into it. So the only way to kind of tackle this is to clamp it here and usually in a second place as well to stop it pivoting. But that means that if I was to sand it, for example, I'd have to move that clamp to here in order to sand that area and then move it here to sand that area. And you're kind of like chasing your tail quite a lot, especially if you're working through the grits of it. Same thing with planing as well. And finally, one of my biggest annoyances with workbenches like this, I don't even know if annoyance is a word, is tool trays. They are so annoying. Good for holding tools, I admit, yeah, pretty good. However, if you've got little screwdriver bits like this, they fall in there and then it gets covered in shavings and then you clean it out and you lose your screwdriver bits. So I'm missing like 5 of these now at home, which is incredibly annoying. I don't really find a need for tool trays that often, so I'm going to find a way of storing my tools temporarily while I'm at the bench. However, it's not going to be in the form of a trench that's cut into it that can just get filled with crap. So that kind of outlines all the problems with this workbench and the one at home. So now we know all of the problems that we need to address. Let's go to the computer and I will show you the design of the Roubo Workbench. Okay, so it's worth saying at this point that this is not a Roubo Workbench on a budget. This is a Roubo Workbench for life. So it's quite a big investment I'm taking. There's a lot of material and it's not if you want to save money. It is if you want to spend money on a long-term investment. So anyway, let's go onto the SketchUp document and I'll show you that. So this is the Roubo Workbench. Now, as you can see, it's absolutely massive. So this top, for example, if you want to get a bit of scale, is 120 mil. So that's just under 5 inches thick. It's all made out of laminates. So I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 on each side, so 16 altogether. Now, you will notice, first of all, that there's a massive hole down the middle. Now, this serves a few functions, so 2 of which I'll go over. Firstly, if you ever want to clamp something to the middle of that bench, and you don't have the hold fast holes down it, so that is, I forgot I can't point at the screen, I have to circle it. So if you don't have any of these holes sort of in the centre, it means that you can just put a normal clamp down there and clamp it to this section here. So that makes it a little bit more versatile, and you can obviously put other hardware down there as well if you need to start clamping stuff to your bench. The other function of it is that it helps with wood expansion. Now, I'll just get this bit of wood I've got here. Wood expands and contracts with moisture in the air. Now, the direction of this change is not in the length of it at all, it's actually in the width of it, so it expands out like that. More so in the actual direction of that grain. So in the way that those lines are going, oh Jesus, this is difficult, that way, it will expand out diagonally like this. So what that means is that if I wasn't to have that gap there in the middle, this whole bench will, if it was to expand at least, it would expand outwards or inwards, and it would start buckling these legs. So if that was to if it was to contract inwards, for example, if that whole top was to shrink and that gap wasn't there, this would become a bit of an A-frame. Now, in practice, it's not actually that much of a problem with workbenches. Chris Schwartz, the guy who is very knowledgeable on workbenches, has this happen to his bench. It's to a very small degree, but it doesn't actually affect it that much. But I don't really want to be dealing with that, to be honest. I'd just rather have that split in the middle so that the wood has space to expand and contract into that section in the middle. So it's got room to move, and I'll do that by putting elongated holes. Oh, I actually remembered to put them in. Look at that. So the top will be bolted down to this stretcher here with elongated holes. So that screw or coach bolt or whatever it is that's going to hold that top in will have room to move side to side under there. So that's the top. That's why there's a massive hole in there. And also in that section there, I'm going to put a tool holder as well. So something just to store tools temporarily. Because as I said, on the workbench I have at home, that tool tray serves no purpose to me other than to catch shavings, which is a nightmare to clean out at the end of it because it's just a mixture of tools and mess and crap in there. So I'm not having a tool tray on this. It's just going to be a temporary insert that I can remove and also have tools stored in there if I want to. So other features of this bench, you might notice these beautiful joints we got here. So these are constructed using laminates instead, because what happened with the previous Roubo workbenches, essentially these tops would be made out of massive slabs of wood, massive slabs, so they wouldn't be laminated, just huge. And these joints would be cut into it by hand. So that's not ideal. I don't really want to be doing that because by that point it starts to become timber framing and you get all these small gaps and stuff and it's very difficult to get it crisp. So David Barron, who's another YouTuber, I'll overlay his video now, did a awesome video kind of explaining how he constructed these joints on his workbench and the easiest way to do it without making it a massive job of timber framing. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well because it's very good. It doesn't actually go over him actually making it, but it shows how it all goes together and makes it pretty clear. So in this series I'm going to show you how I constructed it and yeah, how I also laid everything out as well, because it doesn't, his video isn't too clear on that part of it, on the layout. So I've also added some draw bores to it just for the sake of it. This tenon in here doesn't go straight through, it actually wedges out as well, so that's what those two walnut inserts are on it. It's straight like that, and then you shove two inserts in it to make it splay out like this. So the next part, I'll go over vices, I think. So a good workbench should be able to hold wood like this. So if I'm working on the top of it, planing it this way, should be able to hold it like that. If I'm doing dovetails, it should be able to hold it like this, so I can work on the end, cut it down there, and it should be able to hold it like this in the vise, so I can plane along this edge as well. Now, let me think. My workbench at home has a Moxon vise on it at the moment. Now this is very good for dovetailing, very good for holding it upright like that, so you can go and do your dovetails, and it's nice as long as it isn't too wide to fit between the two massive screws that are there. Now this kind of leads on to the problem with the next part. If you're planing stuff on edge, it can be a bit of an issue because you kind of have to rest them on those two screws within the vise and plane along the top, and if the board's too wide then you're sort of planing up here and it's quite difficult to do. And then with holding stuff flat, I have relied on Veritas hardware, so stuff with the 3/4 inch holes, stuff that I've put in this desk actually, workbench. So that's a 3/4 inch dog that goes in one hole, slide the wood up to that, and then you've got a thing called a Wonder Dog that Veritas have made that kind of replaces a tail vise that can then slide up to here and clamp that in place so that then I can plane over the top. And these are good, however, if you're working on smaller sections, so stuff that's less than, well, stuff about as thin as this, to be honest, the dog is obviously adjustable height, so you can make that so it doesn't protrude above the top of this wood. The Wonder Dog, however, is a fixed height, so if you start planing the wood below the height of that dog, or the Wonder Pup, sorry, you're going to hit it with your plane blade and dent it quite considerably. So that's not ideal. They also do things called bench blades, which are like really low profile Wonder Dogs. However, those are not adjustable front to back. They kind of work on a cam action, so you have to have your holes very well placed. And yeah, it's just a bit fiddly, to be honest. And that's what I mean by saying a workbench should be able to hold a bit of wood like that, a bit of wood like that, and a bit of wood like that, without any obstruction or difficulty to the user. Just makes it nice and user friendly and something that you shouldn't have to faff about. So let's address how this bench gets around that, I suppose. So first of all, let's go on the tail vise. So tail vise this is all bench crafted hardware as well, so it's pretty expensive stuff, but it's so nice. It's so nice, and I just couldn't resist it. I didn't really want to get the polished version of it because it looks a little bit too crisp, I think. I got the kind of roughly cast stuff because I think it might suit the overall style a bit. So this one is called a wagon vise. Now, on a lot of workbenches that you might have seen in the past, there's like an L section on the side here, and basically what happens as you loosen this, the whole L section will move out, and there's basically a fixed dog in there, and that is a tail vise. That is what it's called, or that's what it is, sorry. This is called a wagon vise because instead of a whole L block moving here, it's just this carriage here. So can I move it? Oh, I did make it separate. So it'll just move like this as this hand wheel is turned. So what this means is that I can put a dog in that section there, and maybe in one of these holes as well, and I can clamp boards of many different lengths up until the length of this workbench, which is 2 meters long. So the advantage with that over the Wonder Pups that I'm using at home is that because it's both dogs that I'm going to be using these holes, they're both height adjustable, so I can work on any material up to any thickness. For holding stuff upright, I've got a leg vise here. Now this will move, this whole section moves in and out like this. There's going to be a massive thread going behind that hand wheel, obviously, and I'm also going to be using the crisscross hardware. Oh Christ, I can't get it back now. There you go. I'm going to be using the crisscross hardware on this as well. So what that means is the problem with leg vices is that if you imagine that thread is going through there and you're clamping something in this top section here, what happens, can I do it on here? Yes. So as I clamp something in that top section, it's going to buckle on that thread and it's going to tilt in like this, and that obviously starts pinching the wood in that clamp section, and it doesn't provide the force that it needs to in order to hold it in place. So the crisscross hardware is like a cross frame that goes in there that prevents that from buckling. It's a little bit of extra money, but I don't really want to be faffing about with it. Again, if you look at David Barron's video, he's got a pegboard that goes in here just on the lower section, and that allows it to, well, basically you put a peg in that kind of matches the rough thickness of the timber that you're clamping in that vise, and it stops it from being able to buckle. So yeah, that is the leg vise, and that means that I can clamp anything along the height of that workbench nice and easily. But yeah, so that leg vise clamps it directly onto the leg. Now, obviously, like I said, with quick release vices, if you're working on wider case size where you're wanting to work with the board upright like this, it's going to start expanding out into this section here. Now, you can't clamp it to the front of the bench because this is a full 5 inches thick here. It's all the way through. There's no skirt on it. So on some workbenches, you can actually put a G-clamp underneath and hook it to this front bit and clamp your board to the front here. Because it's fully 5 inches thick all the way through, I added a sliding dead man, which is what this is called. It's got such a cool name, sliding dead man. Now this slides on a sort of bird's mouth joint down here. The reason this is a bird's mouth is because if it was a groove, what happens is as shavings fall off the top of that bench, it all falls into that groove down there and it clogs it up and it makes it a bit of a nightmare to slide up and down. So that is why it is a bird's mouth joint. So sliding dead man slides up and down that joint, and if I am doing a case side that extends really far beyond that vise, I can move this up to the edge of it, clamp it against that instead, and that is locked into place into a groove, which I forgot to draw on the underside here. So that basically makes that job a lot easier to do. Now this also serves a function when I'm planing stuff on edge like this along this top section. I can clamp that front section in the vise here as it comes out. So I clamp it in there, butt it up against the thread probably, or maybe not, but that's as far as in it will go. And then, because this sliding dead man is flush with the front of the bench, the piece of wood will extend out. Do you know what, I might just draw it quickly. If I just get that in here. Oh my god, it's massive. Ooh, right, okay, we're there. So, obviously you can clamp the bit of wood in the workbench like so. However, if it was a lot longer than this, it might start rocking in that vise. Now these vices have a very good grip strength, but it might start rocking in there. It also might start moving in and out like this if it was a little bit of a bendy piece of wood. So what you can do is put that in the vise like that. There you go. And then with this sliding dead man, that can slide up, and I can put a dog, oh, not that bit. I can put a dog in one of these holes, or maybe a holdfast or something like that, and clamp this board to the front of the bench. And that means that I can clamp the wood securely in 2 places, on the vise here and against the sliding dead man here. So that's kind of how the workbench holds the wood in 3 different dimensions as easily as possible. I'm considering also putting a few dog holes and holdfast holes in the back section here as well, just so that I do have, if I'm doing dovetailing and I want it to chop down into something, then I can clamp it from the top with a holdfast as I would normally. But I'm sort of debating over what holdfast I actually want to use, because Chris Schwarz has just opened or just started a company called Crucible Toolworks, and they are making a beautiful holdfast that's, I think it's a 1 inch thick stem on it, and it would go with the rest of this hardware absolutely beautifully. But the problem with it being a 1 inch hole is that it doesn't suit the Veritas hardware, which is a 3/4 inch. So I'm kind of tying that up in my head at the moment. I don't really know what to choose. So I am going to be putting holdfast holes there. I just haven't decided what. Let's go over other features. Oh yeah, this dovetail at the end. It looks pretty to start with, which is always good. Now this, in addition to looking pretty, does actually serve a function, because what happens when you've got a bit of wood between those dogs there, as you clamp this inwards, and it's pushing on the bit of wood that it's going to be clamping, this hand wheel is actually sort of pulling this walnut section, in this case, away from the workbench. And this is why you use dovetails in drawers, because of the mechanical strength of it. It stops you from being able to pull that bit of wood clean off the other section there because of that mechanical strength in there. So in this case, these dovetails, in addition to looking pretty, are also stopping you from being able to rip it off the edge of the bench. So yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest. It's going to be all mortise and tenon joints on these stretchers. I am doing a slatted bottom on it. I might add a workbench. I'm going to add a workbench to my workbench. I'm going to add a cabinet to the underside of the workbench in the future, possibly, because I quite like the look of shaker style workbenches as well. So I'm wondering if I can kind of combine both Roubo and shaker into one and make something that looks quite pretty but still functional at the same time. Because the problem with putting cabinets on the underside is, you know, if wood was to fall or shavings was to fall through these dog holes, where's it going to go? It's just going to clog them up, and then you've got to get a vacuum down there to hoover them all out periodically. So I've got to try and work that out without making it look a little bit weird. Other things, so this leg vise, I'm not really sure on that shape yet. I'm definitely having this sort of cut out on the top here, but the actual shape of it, I've seen a few different designs, and this is one that I'm working with for now, but we'll see in the future. So yeah, that is the workbench. I think I've gone over everything. Yeah, I'd say I've gone over everything. So now that's all been explained, I will show you the joint that I made, the David Barron style joint that I will be using for the workbench top. So this is it. It's a scale model, obviously, because this is only about 1.5 inches thick, and my final workbench is going to be 5, so it's going to be huge like this. These holes are not going to be that spacing up. In fact, there's not even any holes in the leg, so I don't even know why I drilled these in. Looks pretty cool there. But yeah, so this is the mock-up, and it went pretty well. I'll go over, when I actually get to it, I'll go over sort of how I worked out this spacing for the wedge tenon on top here. As you can see, they're not even. That one on the, your left, it's a little bit bigger. It's really annoying, and it's also not even on the middle section either. So I've learned from that. I know how to fix it now. There's a few bits I need to sort of address as well, such as that joint, that gap on the shoulder line I'm not sort of happy with. But this is the first joint. Oh look, I bookmatched the end grain as well. How about that? I didn't even notice that. Pretty cool. But yeah, so that's the joint that I knocked together. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this episode, to be honest. I just wanted to go over the design of the workbench so you actually know what I'm making. The next one's going to be focused on going to the sawmill, so we'll see how that goes, because this is about 11 cubic feet of ash. I forgot to mention that, it's made out of ash over beech. Same sort of price, but I just don't like the look of beech, to be honest. I prefer the streaky look of ash. Yes, it's more open grain, yes, it might get dirtier, but I don't care, it's going to look nicer. That's why I'm choosing ash. So anyway, it's about 11 cubic feet, and I don't really know how much wastage to accommodate for on this, because I've never worked on something this sort of scale. So we'll see how that goes, but that'll be the next episode. If you see anything massively wrong with this workbench, or you want to, you think I should change something on it, let me know, because that's the advantage with doing videos kind of in a live format like this. You can still change my direction on things. So if you have anything you want to suggest, or anything that you have any experience with, let me know, because it would be really good to sort of start collaborating, I suppose. So yeah, see you for the next episode.